My name is Adrian, and on the day my family exiled me to the dead desert, my older brother Blake laughed so hard he almost fell off his horse. I remember thinking that was useful, not the exile, the laugh. People reveal a lot when they think they have already won. Blake laughed with his whole body. My father Grant did not laugh at all. He just sat straight in the saddle with that cold, noble expression he used whenever he wanted everyone nearby to understand that he was important. Behind them, the family soldiers avoided looking at me. They had watched my ability examination that morning. They had watched the crystal flare with the weakest possible symbol. Water creation, no fire, no lightning, no sword aura, no dragon blood, no ancient spirit, just water. The examiner had asked me to demonstrate, so I held out one finger and made a little stream of clean water pour into a silver bowl. Blake had called it a servant skill. Grant had called it proof that I was unfit to inherit anything. By sunset, I was standing beside a broken wagon at the edge of a desert where nothing had grown for 300 years, with one bag of food, one shovel, and a family banner they had apparently included as a joke. Grant pointed across the dunes and told me the land was now mine. Every direction looked exactly the same. Sand, cracked stone, heat, and more sand. Then Blake leaned over and asked whether I planned to water the entire desert one cup at a time. I smiled, because that was the first mistake they made. They assumed my skill worked like ordinary magic. It did not. The examiner only tested how much mana my ability consumed. The answer was 0. He never tested how long I could use it, because everyone already considered it worthless. That meant nobody knew what I knew. I could create water forever. I waited until Grant, Blake, and the soldiers disappeared beyond the ridge. Then I walked to the highest dune, raised both hands, and started pouring water down the slope. At first it was a stream, then I widened it, then I widened it again. A ribbon became a creek. The creek became a rushing channel. Sand collapsed under it. Dust turned black with moisture. The water hissed against the hot ground and rolled forward in a shining blue sheet. I stared at it for 10 seconds. Then I laughed harder than Blake had. Apparently my useless servant skill could produce enough drinking water to drown a cavalry unit. Good to know, I spent the first night doing something nobody expected an exiled noble to do. I dug. Not because I needed a well. I was the well. I needed people to think I had discovered one. That distinction mattered. If travelers heard that one boy could create infinite water, I would become a curiosity. Someone might try to kidnap me, worship me, dissect me, marry me, or all four in a very confusing order. If travelers heard that I had found an underground spring, they would bring tools, animals, food, information, and money. So I dug a deep pit, lined it with stone from a ruined watchtower, then filled it from below whenever nobody was looking. By sunrise, I had the only full well within several hundred miles. By noon, I had my first visitors. A merchant caravan appeared in the distance like a line of exhausted ants. Their animals were stumbling. Their water barrels were empty. The caravan leader was a sharp-eyed young woman named Evelyn. She looked at my well, looked at me, then looked at the empty desert around us. I could almost hear the questions assembling behind her eyes. I told her the truth in the least useful way possible. I said I had found water. I did not say where. Evelyn asked how much I wanted for it. I told her nothing. That confused her more than a ridiculous price would have. I let the entire caravan drink for free. I filled every barrel. I watered every animal. Then, while everyone was distracted, I secretly pushed more water through cracks under the well so it never dropped by even an inch. Evelyn noticed. Of course she noticed. That was why I liked her immediately. She asked whether the well was magical. I asked whether that would make the water taste better. She said no. I said then it did not matter. Before leaving, she offered me gold anyway. I refused it and asked for seeds, tools, and one favor instead. Tell everyone, not about me. About the water. 2 weeks later, the desert had traffic. Caravans rerouted to pass my well. Travelers stopped long enough to rest. Some brought food, some brought lumber, some brought seeds because Evelyn apparently understood exactly what I was doing and decided to participate for entertainment. I never charged anyone for drinking water. That was the bait. What I sold was everything water made possible. I cut shallow trenches away from the well and filled them at night. I planted grains beside them. When the first green shoots pushed through land that had been dead for centuries, people stopped calling my camp a rest stop. They started calling it a miracle. Miracles are useful, but only if you control the schedule. So I made sure the next one happened during the busiest caravan day of the month. I had spent 3 nights building a long stone channel up the side of a dune. It looked absurd because water does not naturally climb uphill. That was the point. When nearly 200 travelers gathered at the well, I climbed onto the broken watchtower, lifted one hand, and created a high-pressure jet inside the channel. The water shot upward, raced over the dune, and exploded from the top like a blue dragon. People screamed. I increased the flow. The jet curved through the air, glittering in the sunlight, then crashed into a second trench I had dug behind the camp. Water raced around the settlement in a perfect ring. Children ran after it. Merchants dropped cups. One camel jumped into a grain cart. I stood on the tower with my cloak snapping in the wind and tried very hard to look like I had planned the camel. By evening, everyone in the region knew the dead desert had a fountain taller than a castle wall. That was the second mistake my family made. They thought exile removed me from the board. It actually gave me the only territory nobody else wanted, which meant nobody was watching while I changed the rules. Evelyn returned with 3 wagons instead of 1. She brought fruit trees, metal tools, and the expression of someone who had discovered a profitable mystery. She walked past the new fields, inspected the canals, and asked how much water the well could really provide. I told her enough. She asked enough for what? I pointed at the horizon. She stopped smiling. That was the moment she understood I was not trying to survive the desert. I was trying to own it. The next stage began with a problem: soil. Water could make sand wet, but wet sand was still terrible farmland. So I needed organic material, fertilizer, and people who knew how to grow things under brutal heat. Luckily, desperation makes people travel farther than ambition ever will. A group of refugees arrived from the north after crop failures drove them from their villages. I did not ask for their life stories. I showed them green fields, full wells, and shaded tents. Then I offered them a simple deal with no papers, no hidden tricks, and no noble nonsense. Help build this place, and this place feeds you. They accepted before I finished the sentence. Within a month, the camp became a town. Within 2 months, the town became a problem for everyone who had laughed at it. We collected animal waste from caravans, composted food scraps, mixed clay from deep dry basins into the sand, and flooded new plots in controlled cycles. I used endless clean water to wash salt from the soil. We planted fast-growing grass to hold dunes in place, then planted vegetables behind it. Whenever morale dropped, I did something ridiculous. One afternoon, the workers were exhausted from digging a canal, so I climbed onto a stone platform and announced that the canal would finish itself. Technically, this was a lie, but only for about 6 seconds. I created a narrow water jet so powerful it carved through packed sand like a blade. I swept it forward in a straight line. Mud exploded everywhere. People scattered while laughing and screaming. 10 minutes later, the trench extended another half-mile. The workers stared at me. I stared at the trench. Then I pretended I had known exactly how much mud would hit Evelyn. She wiped sand from her face and promised to charge me for her ruined coat. I reminded her I still had not charged her for water. She threw the coat at me. The town loved it. That mattered more than dignity. Power is not only about winning, it is about making people enjoy watching you win. Soon, travelers were staying permanently. Builders raised homes from sun-baked brick. Smiths used water wheels to power hammers. Farmers expanded fields along the canals. We planted date palms, citrus trees, melons, beans, and anything else people swore could survive heat. I planted grapes purely because Blake hated raisins. Petty decisions can also be strategic. Then the desert sent me its first real challenge. A sand beast the size of a courthouse surfaced near the western fields. Nobody had a name for it because everyone who had previously seen one had been too busy running. It looked like a centipede made of armor plates and bad decisions. It had a mouth wide enough to swallow a wagon and dozens of hooked legs that churned through dunes faster than horses. The town guards fired arrows. The arrows bounced off. People panicked. I did not. Mostly because I had spent the last 2 months preparing for exactly the kind of disaster that lets a leader become unforgettable. I walked into the open field. Evelyn yelled that I was insane. I told her that was only true if the plan failed. The beast charged. I waited. 200 feet, 150. Then I snapped my fingers. Water erupted from a buried trench directly under the monster, not enough to hurt it, enough to turn the ground into soup. Its front half sank, its back half did not. The result was the largest accidental cartwheel I had ever seen. The creature flipped over itself, rolled down a dune, and crashed into the exact basin I had spent 3 days digging. Then I filled the basin. The monster thrashed as water rose around it. Everyone expected me to drown it. Instead, I kept the water shallow. The beast stopped fighting. It drank, for almost 5 straight minutes. That told me everything. It had not attacked because it was hunting us. It had smelled water. I walked closer, created a gentle stream, and let it drink directly from my hands. By sunset, the terrifying desert monster was lying beside the western canal like an enormous armored dog. Children were climbing on it. I had acquired a magical beast without knowing whether magical beasts could technically be acquired. The next morning, 3 more appeared. That was inconvenient. Then I realized they could dig. That was extremely convenient. I used streams of water to guide them across the desert, rewarding them whenever they tunneled where I wanted canals. Within a week, my new excavation crew had done months of work and eaten zero wages. They did, however, require a truly unreasonable amount of water. Fortunately, I had a truly unreasonable amount of water. Our oasis doubled in size, then doubled again. And for the first time, Grant sent someone to investigate me. I knew the moment the northern riders appeared that they were not ordinary travelers. Normal travelers stared at the water first. These men stared at the walls. That meant Grant finally understood the joke was no longer funny. I could have confronted them. I could have searched them. I could have sent them away. All three options would have been stupid. If someone is spying on you, the worst thing you can do is stop them before deciding what you want them to see. So I gave them a tour. Not personally, of course. That would have been suspicious. I arranged for the busiest canal gate to open as they passed. I had workers move enormous baskets of fruit through the central square. I scheduled the sand beasts to dig beside the road. I even ordered the fountain towers turned on early. By then I had built 6 of them. Each tower used water pressure to launch shining arcs over the streets. They cooled the air, filled public basins, and made the entire oasis look like someone had dropped a royal garden in the middle of the sun. The spies tried not to stare. They failed. Then I showed them something false. At the eastern edge of the settlement, I had one canal that looked unfinished. The banks were rough. The fields beyond it were empty. Several broken tools were scattered nearby. I made sure the spies saw it. I wanted Grant to believe I had reached my limit. That night, the riders left. The next morning, I extended the eastern canal 12 miles. The trick was simple. I had already dug most of it underground. By the time Grant received news that my expansion had stalled, the expansion was finished. Why bother hiding it? Because I knew my father. Grant did not fear threats. He crushed threats. What he feared was being surprised. So I decided to make surprise my main export. A month later, Blake arrived himself. He rode into my oasis wearing polished armor and the same smile he had worn on the day of my exile. Behind him came soldiers, servants, and empty wagons. The empty wagons interested me most. Grant had not sent Blake to mock me. He had sent him to buy food. Their northern estates were suffering from a dry season. Not a disaster yet, just enough to make prices rise. Blake walked through streets full of shade trees, market stalls, tiled pools, and people eating fresh fruit in a desert he remembered as dead. I watched his confidence lose a fight with reality. He asked how I had done it. I told him hard work. He looked at a sand beast pulling a stone roller while drinking from a fountain taller than his family mansion. I told him very hard work. He did not laugh. Good. That meant the lesson was entering the useful stage. Blake wanted grain. I had grain. He wanted fruit. I had so much fruit that children were throwing oranges at each other for sport. He wanted a cheap price because we were family. I reminded him that he had personally cheered when I stopped being family. Then I sold him the food at the normal market price. No revenge tax, no humiliation fee, no dramatic refusal. That would have been emotionally satisfying and strategically terrible. I wanted Grant to buy from me. The more my old family depended on my oasis, the less dangerous they became. But Blake made another mistake before leaving. He walked too close to the central reservoir. He saw me create water, not a bucket, not a cup, a column. I had been refilling the reservoir from beneath a stone bridge. Water blasted from my palm in a continuous blue torrent thick enough to fill a bath every second. Blake froze. I froze. For one brief moment, both of us understood exactly what had happened. Then I smiled. He had discovered my secret, which meant I no longer needed the secret. I stepped onto the bridge railing and increased the flow until the column roared like a waterfall. People looked up. Workers stopped. Merchants turned. The entire square watched as I raised both arms and sent twin streams spiraling into the reservoir. Then I shouted the truth. The well had never been the source. I was. There was silence. Then someone cheered. Then everyone cheered. Blake looked horrified. He thought I had been exposed. He did not understand that secrets are only valuable until the reveal becomes more valuable. For months, I had needed people to trust the oasis rather than depend on one mysterious boy. Now the city was large enough, loyal enough, and productive enough that revealing my power did not make me vulnerable. It made me a symbol. By sunset, painters were already putting blue waves on walls. By the next week, children were copying my hand gesture and spraying each other with buckets. One little menace hit Evelyn in the face. I considered promoting him. Blake returned north with his wagons and a much worse problem than he brought. He had to explain me. Meanwhile, I turned the revelation into momentum. If everyone knew I created water, there was no reason to pretend the canals were ordinary anymore. So I stopped being subtle. I built pressure towers along the main streets. I filled elevated tanks by blasting water straight upward. Gravity fed it through pipes into homes and workshops. Water wheels powered mills. Mills ground grain. Grain fed bakeries. Bakeries fed workers. Workers built more towers. Then I built a lake. Not because we needed one. We already had reservoirs. I built it because a city in the middle of the dead desert deserved a lake large enough to confuse migrating birds. The basin took 3 weeks to excavate with sand beasts and crews. Filling it took me 1 afternoon. I stood on a cliff above the basin, stretched both arms out, and created a waterfall from empty air. The first hour, people watched. The second hour, they brought chairs. The third hour, merchants started selling snacks. By sunset, the basin had become a glittering inland sea surrounded by fresh mud and cheering crowds. The next morning, thousands of birds landed there. 2 days later, fish merchants arrived asking whether I wanted stock for the lake. I said yes. 3 months after that, we had fisheries. The dead desert now exported fish. That sentence alone was worth everything. Evelyn began organizing caravans on a scale I had never seen. Salt went out, fruit went out, grain went out, dried fish went out. Glass went out because the desert had excellent sand and now we had unlimited water for cooling workshops. Cloth went out because irrigated fields could grow fiber crops. Perfume went out because I had ordered an absurd number of flowers planted around the lake. I did not become rich by selling water. I became rich by making water free enough that everyone around me could create something more valuable. That was the move Grant never would have understood. He saw resources as things to lock behind walls. I saw resources as bait. Give people one thing they desperately need, and they will build 10 things you want. Soon, the oasis was no longer a town. People started calling it a city. I refused to name it after myself. That would have been embarrassing. I waited until other people started doing it for me. They called it Adrian's Oasis at first, then simply Adrian. I pretended to object twice. After that, I allowed history to make its own terrible naming decisions. Our next challenge came from underground. The sand beasts began refusing to dig near the southern ridge. They would approach, shake their armored heads, and retreat. Workers thought they were tired. I knew better. Animals are often smarter than committees, and these beasts had survived the desert long before we arrived. So I investigated. I flooded a narrow test shaft near the ridge and watched where the water disappeared. It drained sideways through cracks in the rock. A hollow space. A very large hollow space. I sent a small stream through the crack and listened. Several seconds later, I heard an echo like distant thunder. There was a cavern beneath the ridge. Naturally, I decided to fill part of it with water and see what happened. Evelyn called this reckless. I called it science with better marketing. The water level rose inside the hidden cavern until pressure forced air through vents all along the ridge. Hundreds of tiny holes began whistling at once. The entire mountain started singing. Not well. It sounded like 1,000 kettles being attacked by ghosts. People ran from the city to watch. Then one section of rock split open. Out crawled a herd of lizard-like magical beasts covered in crystal scales. They had been living underground, trapped by collapsed passages, surviving on moisture in the deep stone. The moment they smelled open water, they charged straight toward me. Everyone screamed again. I was noticing a pattern. I created a wall of water 15 feet high. The beasts hit it, vanished inside, and came out the other side sliding across the sand like jeweled sleds. One spun 3 full circles before crashing into a melon cart. The crowd went silent. Then the beast began eating melons. So did the others. Problem solved, mostly. The crystal beasts turned out to shed scales harder than steel and bright enough to be used in jewelry. More importantly, they loved bathing in shallow mineral pools. I now had another reason for merchants to cross half the continent. Our city had become a place where impossible things kept becoming industries by accident. That made people curious. Curiosity brought visitors. Visitors brought money. Money brought builders. Builders brought more problems. My favorite cycle. Then Grant stopped buying food. That was not because his lands recovered. They had gotten worse. I knew because traders talked. Northern rivers were shrinking. Harvests were failing. Wells were dropping. Yet Grant had ordered his estates to stop purchasing from me. Pride. Finally, an enemy I could defeat without lifting a finger. But I did not want Grant to collapse yet. A starving neighbor is not a victory. It is a refugee wave, a security problem, and usually a very annoying family reunion. So I needed him to accept my food without feeling that he had surrendered. The obvious solution was to send it secretly. The clever solution was to make him request it publicly while believing the request was his own idea. I started by lowering export prices everywhere except the north. Merchants redirected their routes toward my city because profit was better here. Northern markets became even emptier. Then I hosted a massive harvest festival and invited every major trading caravan in the region. I made sure the celebration was ridiculous. We built fruit towers 3 stories tall, We raced sand beasts through shallow canals. I created a spinning ring of water over the central plaza and had cooks roast fish beneath it while the spray cooled the crowd. At night, crystal scales reflected lantern light across the lake until the entire shore glittered. Travelers carried those stories north. I wanted Grant's people to hear about overflowing food while their own grain stores shrank. Pressure from below is stronger than pressure from an enemy. Within weeks, northern villagers began demanding that Grant reopen trade. He refused. So I made the next move. I sent Blake a gift. 1 peach, nothing else, no note, no insult, just the largest, juiciest peach our orchards had produced. Evelyn stared at me for a full 10 seconds when I explained the plan. She asked whether I was seriously trying to defeat my brother with fruit. I told her not fruit, jealousy. Blake had always wanted whatever he was told he could not have. 3 days later, he arrived with 20 wagons, exactly as predicted. He claimed the purchase was for soldiers. I did not care if he claimed it was for decorative goats. I sold him grain. The moment Blake brought food north, Grant's ban became meaningless. Other nobles followed. Trade reopened without Grant ever admitting he had changed his mind. I gave him an escape from his own pride, and in exchange, his entire region became economically tied to me. I never needed to defeat my father. I only needed to make his best option point in my direction. That was when I realized I had outgrown the oasis. A city could be rich. A kingdom could decide what rich meant. The idea of becoming king did not come from me. At least, that is the version I encouraged people to repeat. In reality, I had been preparing for it for 6 months. A crown means nothing if people think you grabbed it because you were bored. A crown becomes powerful when everyone else begs you to wear it. So I did not announce a kingdom. I announced a new canal. The canal would run beyond the oasis and connect 3 distant settlements that had always depended on seasonal wells. I offered water, builders, seed, and protection from desert beasts. I asked for no banners and no oaths. I did not need to. A village connected to my water would trade with my city. A village trading with my city would use our coins. A village using our coins would depend on our markets. Give it enough time, and the map changes before anyone bothers drawing a new one. The canal project was my most ridiculous construction yet. For the first 20 miles, we used ordinary trenches. Then we reached a canyon. Everyone expected us to go around. Going around was boring. So I built across the air. Stone arches rose from both sides of the canyon. Workers laid a channel across the top, but the middle span was too wide to support without months of extra work. I solved that problem by refusing to wait. On opening day, thousands gathered on the cliffs. The unfinished aqueduct stopped 30 feet short of the opposite side. Evelyn asked whether I had finally lost my mind. I told her I had misplaced it months ago. Then I stepped to the edge, raised one hand, and fired a stream of water through the open gap. Not a splash. A continuous shining bridge. The jet crossed the canyon, landed perfectly inside the far channel, and kept flowing. For several minutes the canal literally traveled through open air. People screamed themselves hoarse. Then hidden crews swung the final stone trough into place beneath the stream, and locked it between the arches. The water bridge became a real bridge while everyone watched. Was that necessary? No. Was it efficient? Also no. Did every merchant on the continent start talking about the Sky River? Yes. That made it priceless. By the end of the season, the 3 settlements were green. A 4th asked to join the canal network, then a 5th. Then a mining town farther west offered metal in exchange for a branch line. Soon my water routes looked like blue veins spreading across the desert. People began calling the entire region my realm even though I had never claimed it. I continued pretending to be surprised. Then the desert tried to kill the performance. A dust storm appeared on the southern horizon larger than anything our scouts had seen. The sky turned brown at noon. Birds fled toward the lake. The crystal beasts buried themselves. Even the sand beasts curled into armored balls. The old desert travelers said the storm could last 2 days. 2 days of wind strong enough to bury fields, choke canals, rip roofs away, and turn our beautiful oasis back into a sand pile. Everyone expected me to order an evacuation. Instead, I ordered every fountain turned on. Evelyn looked at me the way people look at someone who has just challenged weather to a duel. That was fair. I had challenged weather to a duel. We opened every canal gate. We filled the outer trenches until the soil became heavy mud that blowing sand could not easily move. I had workers anchor cloth screens between towers. Then I climbed the highest pressure tower in the city. The storm wall approached. It was enormous. I could not stop wind. But I did not need to stop wind. I needed to make the wind carry something heavier than dust. I aimed hundreds of pressure nozzles upward and fed them all at once. Water exploded into the sky as mist. Not rain, a cloud made by pure stubbornness. The first edge of the dust storm hit it. The air turned into brown soup. mud began falling from the sky. People shouted and covered their heads as filthy droplets splattered everywhere. I increased the flow. The city disappeared inside a curtain of artificial rain. Dust struck water, clumped together, and fell before it could travel deep into the streets. Canals overflowed on purpose, washing grit into low collection basins. Roof gutters poured like waterfalls. The entire city became one enormous muddy machine built to punch a sandstorm in the face. At the height of it, I stood on the tower soaked from head to toe, hair plastered to my forehead, laughing because I realized we had created the first mud festival in desert history. The children realized it 5 seconds later. By evening, half the city was sliding through streets. Evelyn found me after the storm passed and asked whether I understood how ridiculous I looked. I looked behind her at a perfectly intact city, surrounded by dunes covered in wet sand. I said yes. Ridiculously successful. The storm did more than test us. It advertised us. Every settlement outside our canal network suffered damage. Ours recovered in hours. Requests for connection doubled. Then came a challenge I could not solve by making vegetables grow faster. An army arrived. Not Grant's army. That would have been emotionally interesting but strategically predictable. This force came from a wealthy territory beyond the southern desert. Its ruler had apparently decided that any city rich enough to build lakes and sand was rich enough to take. The army stopped on a ridge overlooking my fields. Thousands of soldiers, heavy cavalry, siege wagons, war mages. Our citizens panicked. I was delighted. Not because I wanted a battle. Battles are expensive, messy, and full of people breaking things I paid for. I was delighted because an invading army had volunteered to become my next demonstration. I had one goal: win without making the city feel like a battlefield. The enemy commander sent a messenger demanding surrender. I sent back a basket of chilled melons. No message, just melons. Confusion is an underrated opening move. The army advanced at sunrise. I let them. They crossed the first empty mile. Then the ground collapsed. Not into spikes, not into traps, into water. I had spent weeks filling buried stone chambers beneath the approach road. When the cavalry reached the marked line, I released the supports and blasted water upward. The road became a chain of sudden fountains. Horses jumped sideways. Soldiers lost formation. Siege wagons rolled into shallow ponds that had not existed 3 seconds earlier. Then I opened the western canal. A wave swept across the flats. It was only knee-deep. Knee-deep water does not sound terrifying until you are wearing armor and trying to stand on polished desert clay. The enemy line turned into a festival of slipping professionals. War mages tried to burn the water away. I replaced it faster. They froze part of it. I added more water around the ice and turned the battlefield into the largest skating rink in recorded history. One cavalry officer slid past our front gate without his horse. I waved. He looked furious. Then came the siege wagons. I had prepared for those too. Pressure towers rotated toward the ridge. I fed them everything. Water cannons erupted over the walls. The first blast hit a siege tower broadside and pushed it 20 feet sideways. The second spun a wagon in a full circle. The third accidentally launched an enemy banner into our lake. Our citizens started cheering every hit like a sporting event. That changed the battle. Fear vanished. People began bringing snacks to the walls. The enemy realized they were not conquering a frightened city. They were performing in front of an audience. So their commander ordered the war mages forward. That was the serious part. A dozen mages combined their power and launched a massive fireball toward the central district. For the first time that morning, the crowd went silent. I had expected fire. I had not expected something the size of a house. Excellent. Bigger attack, bigger answer. I created a vertical column of water so wide it covered the main avenue. The fireball hit it. Steam exploded across the sky. For 1 second, the entire city vanished behind white clouds. Then sunlight passed through the mist and painted a rainbow over the walls. The crowd lost its mind. I could not have planned the rainbow, so naturally, I took credit for it. I raised one hand like the entire thing had been intentional. The enemy army broke. Not because we destroyed them, because by that point, continuing the attack meant being humiliated by plumbing. They retreated south while our citizens threw flower petals from the walls. I did not chase them. I sent water barrels after them. That part confused everyone. Good. I wanted every soldier who survived the desert journey home to tell the same story. Adrian defeated us, then made sure we did not die of thirst. Fear creates enemies. Embarrassed gratitude creates legends. 2 months later, southern merchants arrived under peaceful banners. That was when the crown appeared. I had expected someone to suggest making me king eventually. I had not expected the crown to be carried in by children. Apparently the jewelers had used crystal beast scales, polished silver and a blue stone from the southern ridge. It looked elegant from a distance and extremely heavy up close. Evelyn stood beside the crowd, pretending she had nothing to do with it. That was how I knew she had everything to do with it. People filled the central plaza. Farmers, builders, merchants, refugees, guards, travelers, and families from every settlement connected to our canals. Nobody had been ordered there. Nobody needed to be. They had already decided what I was before I said anything. That was the important part. A ruler who declares himself powerful is begging to be tested. A ruler declared powerful by everyone around him has already passed the test. I took the crown. Then I did something nobody expected. I set it on the fountain beside me. The crowd went quiet. I told them I would wear it after one final demonstration. Evelyn closed her eyes. She knew that sentence usually meant property damage. I raised both hands. Every fountain in the plaza stopped. Every canal gate closed. For 3 seconds, the entire city became silent. Then water erupted from the rooftops. Hidden pipes I had installed weeks earlier came alive at once. Hundreds of streams arced over the streets, crossed above the plaza, and formed a shining dome of water around the crowd. The streams never touched the ground. They curved from tower to tower in perfect blue lines, catching sunlight until the whole city center looked trapped inside a giant crystal. Then the streams shifted. They formed a crown above us. A ridiculous, enormous crown made entirely of moving water. The crowd exploded. I finally picked up the real crown and put it on. That was how the Oasis Kingdom began. No ancient prophecy, no divine sword, no lost royal bloodline, just irrigation, strategy, and a dangerous willingness to turn infrastructure into theater. The next problem was money. Not because we lacked it. We had too much of every kind. Travelers brought coins from dozens of regions. Merchants wasted hours weighing them. Some were silver, some were copper, some were clipped, bent, shaved, stamped, or so old that the king pictured on them had probably become a fossil. Evelyn suggested we mint our own. I agreed on one condition: no crown on the coin. I did not want to look like every boring ruler who had ever discovered metal stamping. I designed a simple mark instead, a wave crossing a sun. The first batch came out beautifully. I held one up. Wave on the front, my face on the back. I slowly turned toward Evelyn. She was already walking away. I followed her. She informed me that merchants wanted a recognizable guarantee. I asked why the guarantee needed my nose. She said my nose was apparently good for trade. I considered ordering the coins remade. Then I watched a visiting trader accept one without weighing it. That stopped me. Trust was faster than metal. Our coin spread because people knew exactly what stood behind it. Full markets, open canals, overflowing granaries, and one man who could refill a lake before lunch. Within months, traders beyond the desert preferred our money. Within a year, I saw my own face in markets I had never visited. It was unsettling. It was also hilarious. Blake had once mocked me for making water in a bowl. Now strangers were buying horses with my cheekbones. Then the northern harvest failed completely. This time there was no pride left to hide behind. Grant's fields dried. His reservoirs shrank. Grain stores emptied. The same noble households that once considered my land worthless began sending wagons south. I could have celebrated. I did not. Winning is only useful if you know what to do after the other side loses. So I prepared the city for them. I ordered extra markets opened. I increased grain shipments. I filled roadside basins all the way north. I made sure nobody insulted hungry travelers coming from my old home. Then, one hot afternoon, a familiar line of riders appeared beyond the northern gate. Grant was at the front. Blake rode beside him. The last time I had seen my father in the desert, he had been leaving me behind with a shovel. Now he entered through walls taller than his manor, under aqueducts carrying rivers through the sky. He passed orchards where dead dunes used to stand. He passed fish markets in a land with no natural river. He passed sand beasts pulling cargo carts while children tossed them fruit. He passed crystal creatures sleeping in decorative pools. He passed fountains shaped like dragons, towers wrapped in vines, and streets cooled by mist. Grant's expression remained controlled. Blake's did not. He looked like someone had taken his understanding of the world, folded it into a small square, and dropped it into a canal. They reached the central market without speaking to me. That was perfect. I wanted the city to explain itself first. Grant approached a grain stall and reached for his old family coins. The merchant shook his head. Those coins were still accepted, but their value had fallen. Everyone preferred Oasis currency. Grant asked for the exchange rate. The merchant handed him a silver piece. Grant looked down. Then he stopped moving. Blake leaned closer. On one side was the wave and sun. On the other side was my face. I had imagined that moment many times. In most versions, I walked in dramatically. I said something devastating. Maybe I laughed. Maybe Blake dropped the coin. Reality was better. A child ran between them chasing a rolling melon, bumped Grant's leg, grabbed the coin by accident, realized it was money, and sprinted away. Grant stared after the child. Blake stared at Grant. The merchant shouted for the child to come back. I had to turn away for several seconds because I was the king now, and kings probably should not collapse laughing in public. When I finally approached, Grant looked older than I remembered. Not defeated, just tired. He said my name, I said his. That was all we needed. He asked whether I had food to sell. I looked past him at the wagons waiting outside the gate. I told him yes, enough for his people, enough for the neighboring estates. Enough to plant the next season if they wanted seed grain too. Blake looked at me as though waiting for the price to become revenge. It never did. I charged the same amount I charged everyone else. That hurt him more. If I punished him, he could tell himself I was still the bitter younger brother he remembered. If I treated him like any other customer, he had to accept something much worse. I had moved on. Grant looked around the market again. He asked whether all of this really came from my water skill. I told him no. The water only made things possible. The rest came from people who saw possibility and stayed. That answer was true. It was also carefully chosen. A king should never let anyone believe his entire kingdom disappears if one ability disappears. Even my father did not need to know every weakness I had or did not have. Some habits are useful forever. Blake finally asked the question I had been waiting years to hear. What was he supposed to do now? I looked at the man who had laughed when I was exiled. Then I pointed toward the Western Canal. A new stretch of desert was being opened for farms. Workers were needed. Supervisors were needed. People who understood northern crops were needed. Blake stared at me. I smiled. I told him he could start by carrying a shovel. For 1 second he looked furious. Then Grant laughed. Actually laughed. The same cold man who had abandoned me in the desert laughed so hard he had to cover his face. Blake looked betrayed by the universe. I decided that was enough revenge for one day. The northern wagons left full. My old family returned home beneath oasis banners marking the safe canal roads. Grant had not bowed to me. Blake had not apologized. I did not need either one. They had entered my kingdom hungry and left carrying food bought with coins stamped with my face. Some victories are improved by not explaining them. That evening, I climbed the tallest tower in Adrian and looked across the desert. Except it was getting harder to call it a desert. Blue canals reflected the sunset in every direction. Villages glowed beside new reservoirs. Orchards formed dark green lines across land that had been empty. Farther out, sand beasts moved like ships between the dunes, digging the next branch of the water network. Evelyn joined me and handed me a report from the southern caravans. I did not read it immediately. She said that was unusual. I told her I was enjoying the view. She told me I was becoming sentimental. I nearly had her removed from the tower for treason. Then she gave me the actual news. Beyond the southern territories was a vast salt basin everyone considered useless. Beneath it, traders had found strange black stone that burned hotter than charcoal. Far to the east, a mountain kingdom wanted our food but had no route through the cliffs. And on the western horizon, scouts had seen something even more interesting. Clouds, not storm clouds. A permanent wall of silver mist sitting over a region maps marked as empty. Most rulers would have looked at 3 impossible problems and chosen one. I looked at the canals below me. Then at the lake. Then at a fountain blasting water 50 feet into the evening sky for absolutely no practical reason. I smiled. My family once gave me the land where nothing could live because they thought it was the safest place to forget me. Now the richest caravans in the world planned their routes around my city. Refugees came here to become farmers. Merchants came here to become wealthy. Magical beasts came here because apparently I had accidentally built the world's largest watering hole. Armies came here once and usually left wet, and my face was on the money. I had turned a useless skill into a kingdom because everyone kept asking the wrong question. They asked how strong water could be. I asked what people would do if I made sure they never ran out of it. The answer was simple. They built everything. I folded Evelyn's report and looked toward the silver mist beyond the horizon. The dead desert had been easy. Now I wanted to know what was hiding in a place even maps were afraid to explain. I raised one hand over the tower railing and let a thin stream of water curl around my fingers. Still no mana. Still no limit I had found. And, somehow, people still kept underestimating me. Perfect.